to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this per tweet from International Boxing News. Guzman versus Ali 2 on November 4th. Ramla Ali and Tszyu Guzman are set to rematch on the Cordina versus Vasquez undercard on November 4th in Monte Carlo, Monaco. Guzman stopped Ali in a firefight back in June. Repeat or revenge?
I want to say I think it's good. I think it's encouraging that Ramla is choosing to run it back.
This isn't like Spence versus Crawford, where it's a complete blowout and where the fighter that lost stands little to no chance of succeeding in a second fight. This really isn't like that. Ramla has the ability to win this fight, to win this rematch.
I know she was violently knocked out. I know she was stopped. But she was having success in that fight. More success, I'd say, than Spence was having against Crawford, Terence Crawford. So this really isn't like that for the psychology of the fighter.
How much would Vasyl Lomachenko have liked to have run it back with Teofimo Lopez, and how much would Teofimo would have liked to run it back with George Kambosos to avenge that loss that could still happen for the benefit of the fighter's psychology, to settle their spirit?
The soul.
This shows us that Ramla is a competitor, fearless, unafraid to go back into the fire with the hard-punching Alejandro Guzman of Mexico. Ahead of their initial meeting, I stated that Alejandro is actually a very big puncher, very strong, and Ramla should not trade punches with her. She's got to be economic, budget those punches, and box from the outside. Move around. Don't let Alejandro set her feet.
Who's Alejandro?
Alejandro's a Mexican pop singer. Who we're talking about is Julissa Guzman.
Guzman's a hard puncher. I said that ahead of the fight. And what Ramla's got to do is use her speed, athleticism, and those long levers to keep this a boxing match and not a firefight. Unfortunately, Ramla put together one too many punches and she got caught.
I believe it was a left hook, a counter left hook, that put Ramla Ali down. And going into the second fight, she has those experiences to draw from. Mind the hook, mind the left hook.
Use your jab more.
Keep the right hand high to protect that side of your face, to protect you from that left hook, and use your jab more.
You can win most of the rounds just using that jab and beating those feet.
Stay on your toes, stay on the balls of your feet, circling away. Keep her moving. Don't let her set her feet. She draws the power from the ground up the way most flat-footed fighters do.
Now, over the years, flat-footed fighters have gotten a bad rap, and some have convinced themselves that they're not as dangerous as they are when they're very dangerous, because they draw their power from the ground up. So when they hit you hard.
But it is a trade-off. Guzman has slower feet than Ramla Ali, and she needs to use that to her advantage in this rematch, to stay on the outside of Julissa Guzman.
Keep it a boxing match.
1 and 2 punches at a time, no more. Don't roll the dice, don't gamble, don't get ahead of yourself.
You noticed almost immediately in their initial meeting that even though Julissa is not as athletic as Ramla Ali, doesn't have the same snap in her punches, she's got much heavier hands than Ramla Ali.
She's not as quick as Ramla, doesn't have the snap in her jab, the snap in her shots that Ramla has, but she does have a lot more power.
Don't punch with her.
Ramla can win this fight, so long as she prevents it from turning into one. If she keeps it a boxing match, sticking and moving and using a jab, minding that left hook, she can win this thing.
Beyond that, I'm of the opinion that the reason they put Ramla in there with Julissa in the first place is because maybe they had half a mind to match her against Yemi Mercado, this division's WBC champion from Mexico.
I think it was their intention to gauge where Ramla Ali is, put her in there with Julissa, see how she fares, and if she comes through it, match her against Yemi, because Julissa is a common opponent between them. Yemi Mercado beat Julissa Guzman some years ago, had a hell of a firefight with her, but she came out on top.
Ramla means to do the same in their rematch, and if she wins,
maybe they get Ramla Ali a Yamileth Mercado fight for what is the WBC Super Bantamweight title. We'll see how it goes down. We'll see how it fares this November. Men's junior middleweight news. I'm sure you've heard by now that Tszyu versus Brian Mendoza has been finalized October 15th for the WBO title. The news was announced late yesterday here in America.
Wednesday night in America is roughly Thursday afternoon in Australia. They're about 15 hours ahead of us.
Tszyu will defend his WBO Super Welterweight World title in Australia on Sunday, October 15th. No Limit Boxing confirmed today, or yesterday, depending on where you are. Tszyu, 28, will defend the WBO Super Welterweight World title for the first time following the organization's decision to to elevate him to full champion status as soon as Jermell Charlo is announced in the ring for his highly anticipated fight with Canelo Alvarez the month before in September. Should the WBC follow the WBO's lead and strip Charlo of the title, Mendoza will be elevated and the fight would become a world title unification match.
For the health and well-being of this division, the WBC should strip Jermell, though it's questionable as to whether or not they will, given the stance they've taken with his brother, Jermall. It's been over 2 years, going on 3 years, since Jermall had a fight, and they've given no specific time frame as to when they want him to return.
The circumstances for both brothers being somewhat different, we don't know for sure if the WBC will or won't extend that courtesy to Jermell.
Supposed to be facing his mandatory challenger by way of the WBO, Tszyu. Instead, Tim is fighting Brian Mendoza.
The 29-year-old from Albuquerque, New Mexico, is the toughest opponent Tszyu will have faced to date, who has shown both his devastating power and comfort in being the underdog when taking on the very best fighters in the division. The winner of the fight on October 15th will seek an undisputed title tilt against Jermell Charlo should he decide to return to the division following his fight on September 30th. Tszyu said, "I'm expecting a war, and I'm expecting Mendoza to test me more than any other fighter. He has power in both hands and has shown he thrives off being that underdog. So I doubt coming to Australia will bother him, but don't expect a single person to be cheering for him, because they won't." Tszyu has a rather large following in his native Australia. I dare say that he's a bigger draw in Australia than Jermell Charlo is in America.
Tszyu is good for the division, he's good for boxing.
This was the fight to be made and the only fight that had me pumped up. Styles make fights and it has the potential to be a banger because we both go looking for the fight, have heavy hands, and chase those killer knockouts everyone loves to replay over and over and over again. The road to undisputed continues. It's just going to take a little longer, but trust me, the journey to get there will be
way sweeter.
No Limit Boxing CEO George Rose said, "Tszyu is the new king of the super welterweight division, and true kings go out and take what's theirs. Tim only wanted the toughest test in this division. Brian Mendoza is that guy who's amassed some very credible and respectable wins over former unified champion Jason Rosario and more recently a highlight reel knockout of then unbeaten Sebastian Fundoria."
Guess Sebastian didn't have a rematch clause.
Immediately after the knockout, there were some rumors and rumblings that they might run it back, but you know, Brian stands to make more money in Australia with Tszyu than he would have made boxing Sebastian Fundora for a second time. Sebastian, God bless him, he's not a big draw here in America.
When he got knocked out by Brian Mendoza, there was barely anybody there to see it.
George Rose continued, "We could have easily looked for a lesser opponent, but Tim and his team made it clear to us that he needed a fight that was going to get him up and about and keep him zoned in 24/7. When you're at the level Tszyu is, chasing undisputed, taking down a guy who can bring a belt to the table and unify is extremely appealing. It's a high-stakes gamble, but this is boxing, and it's now up to Tim to prove it."
Tszyu, who vows fireworks. I couldn't care less about Mendoza's knockouts or ability.
The grooming process for Tszyu the last couple of years has been excellent. Two former champions in Jeff Horn and Tony Harrison.
World title challenger and Olympian, a U.S. Olympian in Terrell Gausha.
Another world title challenger in Carlos Ocampo and a hard-nosed contender in Takeshi Inoue.
Tim is rounding out.
We're the two next pit bulls in a division. It's a tremendous challenge and I look forward to taking it with both hands, Tszyu said to Main Event. We're the two top dogs in the super welterweight division because the other bloke did a runner. Number one versus number one.
Mendoza's got a professional record of 22 wins with just 2 losses and highly regarded after several big wins on his current run, including a knockout of Sebastian Fundora. Tszyu has no fear of Mendoza's punching power and plans to cap off another impressive performance.
He's got a live one in front of him. After 24 professional bouts, 24 fights, Brian Mendoza has never been stopped. Could Tszyu change that?
He lost a split decision to Larry Gomez and a unanimous decision to Jesus Ramos, but he's never been knocked out. He's never been stopped.
In all honesty, anyone that puts gloves on has the same sort of power. Us boxers, we're paid killers, basically. It's what we do. So I respect anyone who gets into the ring, and I respect anyone that's got power. His last performances, you've seen it. One-punch knockouts, and they've been against very, very top opposition. I'm not taking this lightly, but at the same time, people are dropping from me as well. Their eyes are going googly as well.
You could make the argument that Tony Harrison is a great boxer, but he doesn't have much of a chin. Never took the best punch. You could also say that about Carlos Ocampo. To some degree you can.
Spence stopped him in a round at 147 pounds. He racked up several victories since then.
Tim beat him easy.
Could also make that same argument when it comes to Brian Mendoza and former unified champion Jason Rosario. Jason, big kid at 154 pounds. He's big for the weight, but doesn't take the best punch.
Remember, Jermell Charlo stopped him with a jab to the body.
A well-placed jab to the body was enough to take Jason out. You think about Sebastian Fundora. Sebastian, tough kid.
Big.
Though not fundamentally sound, and many of us knew that he was on borrowed time, that it was only a matter of time before somebody goes in there and cleans his clock, because he gives up his height. He's massive for 154 pounds, but he doesn't use it or doesn't know how to.
Brian fucked him up.
Brian's a strong puncher, but then again, so is Tszyu. And Brian won't have the countering opportunities, the same openings with Tszyu that he had with Sebastian Fundora.
That's the difference.
It's a legitimate argument that Brian is the biggest puncher Tszyu will have faced to date.
He's definitely fought one or two hard-nosed guys, tough customers. Takeshi knew he was a hard-nosed guy. He was a tough customer, but I don't think he had Brian's punching power.
Tim's got to be careful. Both Tszyu and Sebastian Fundora have the same base style. They're both mid-range to inside pressure fighters, but Tim is better at it.
Sebastian only elects to fight in the phone booth because he doesn't have much of a jab. He doesn't exhibit much range control.
It's why he sacrifices his height to trade hooks mid-range to inside to try and smother his opponent and get off shots of his own. It's a cop-out.
Whereas Tim's pressure is more calculated, more educated.
Shows more of a jab, and his shot selection overall is better.
Better than Sebastian's.
Guy with the kind of height that Sebastian has, the kind of length, those long levers, and the propensity to throw punches in bunches, a counter shot is perhaps easier to get in there than it would be on Tszyu.
There are more gaps in Sebastian's guard, more holes in his game than what you find in Tim.
It's easier to land on Sebastian than Tszyu.
But it's not saying that Tim is just going to go in there and blast this guy out of there in one round like he did Carlos Ocampo. Tim does have to be careful and mind the counters.
Break him down the way he broke Takeshi Inoue down.
Pick your shots, pick your punches.
This is an excellent fight, and we'll talk more about it as the fight date approaches.
Hopefully we can get the winner of Canelo Charlo, because I feel like that's a big fight to be made as well.
So you'd fight Canelo?
Of course I would. He's a legend. Everything's a possibility, especially when you're at this level right now, at the very 1%. Crawford's very hard to beat. Very hard to beat. I'll be honest with you. When I say Charlo, I say a lot of gaps, a lot of holes. But Crawford, yeah, he's number one pound for pound for a reason. But that doesn't mean that he's unbeatable. He can always find something.
It is Tszyu entertaining the possibility of facing either Jermell Charlo or Canelo Alvarez. I feel like the both of those fights, irrespective of who wins theirs, is contingent upon Tszyu moving up, because I don't expect that either of those fighters will be moving down. Now, Canelo has made it clear he has no intention of campaigning below 168. Jermell, on the other hand, he's been a little bit more open-minded, though people say a lot of things ahead of a fight.
And we've talked about that to no end. In a nutshell, I don't see either Canelo Alvarez or Jermell Charlo being a part of Tszyu's immediate future. Tszyu, who is in the process of trying to unify his own division in the absence of Jermell.
So what the article said, if they play their cards right and the WBC takes a similar stance to the WBO, they elect to strip Jermell Charlo of the WBC title. The fight between Brian and Tim could be for 2 alphabet titles.
I don't think Tim is moving up, not just yet. I think he's going to stay put. I think he's going to try to unify this division. That's what I think.
And if he does end up moving up, I don't think it'll be as broad a leap as what this suggests, that he's going to go from 154 straight to 168. I think he'd make a pit stop at 160 first.
Yeah.
He also entertained the possibility of squaring off against Terrence Crawford, 3-division current reigning undisputed champion, 2-time undisputed champion Terrence Crawford, who could see himself moving up to junior middle very soon, irrespective of whether a Spence rematch happens or not.
You know, because if Spence does activate it, they're saying it'll be at 154, and Terrence is open to that.
But even if Spence doesn't activate the clause, Terrence can decide to move up in weight and take on Tszyu via his WBO Super Champion status. He can use that to take him on straight away.
Terrence can.
Become a 4-division champion. That seems a lot more realistic to me than what has been suggested as of late, that Terence Crawford would move from 147 up to 168 for the winner of Canelo versus Charlo, whoever it is. It's not outside the realm of possibility, you understand, but it is a very broad leap.
A fight with Tim is more feasible, more realistic.
Stylistically, Terence would have the advantage. Sharpshooting, the aggressive pressure fighter looking to get mid-range to inside, to get off punches, to get off shots. Stylistically, Terence has the edge, but physically, Tim is the bigger, younger man, the fresher fighter. So what would overcome what? Would Terence Crawford's experience and stylistic advantage overcome the physical advantage that Tszyu has over him? In truth, I think Terence could win this fight for more or less the same reason he won the Spence fight. Tszyu is a characteristically aggressive guy. He opens up quite a bit, and the more you open up, the more you're open, the more you're countered.
The more you can be.
Terence being the naturally smaller fighter that would be moving up in weight, the older fighter as well. Terence is in his mid-30s, whereas Tim is 28, approximately 8 years younger than Terence Crawford. This is a fight where time is of the essence, that if he's going to take on a guy under these circumstances, he's got to hurry up and do it now before noticeable slippage begins.
Father Time catches up to everybody. It could catch up to Terence if he waits too long to have a fight like this.
I have a high opinion of Tszyu and Tszyu's boxing, and I don't think there would be any shame in Tim potentially losing to Terence Crawford. But as stated, I would favor Terence to win this fight stylistically for the same reason he won the Spence fight. You go opening up on Terence, he's gonna pick you off, pick you apart.
He's a sharpshooter.
An ambidextrous switch hitter that can give you different looks and attack from different angles out of both stances.
The difference between this fight and the Spence fight is that Tim is a fresher, younger fighter than Errol Spence Jr. Errol's more weathered than Tszyu, so it would take more effort to break him down.
He's a solid junior middleweight that is peaking, that is very close to reaching his prime. So I feel like a fight between Terence and Tim might actually be more competitive and somewhat more dangerous than what Terence faced in Errol Spence Jr. Before that fight, some people might have thought that was a hot take.
But now that you've actually seen how Terence handled Errol Spence Jr.,
Tim doesn't have any of Errol's drawbacks. He doesn't have any of Errol's problems. He quite literally is a more active fighter than Errol Spence Jr., a younger fighter, no wear and tear.
at least not as much as Errol.
But he is a prolific puncher, a busy puncher, like Errol Spence Jr., who's naturally bigger and accustomed to dealing with naturally bigger fighters. So I very much like the idea of Crawford versus Tszyu, though I don't know if it happens.
Now let's not get ahead of ourselves. Tim has got to make it past Brian first.
Before it becomes about Terence Crawford or anybody else, he's got to take care of business against that guy, and that guy's a live animal.
See what happens in October.